My father broke my arm, stole my future, and paid off cops to jail me. The shocking betrayal that turned my world upside down and the fight that uncovered a truth I never saw coming. The first clue was subtle, but it gnawed at the edges of my mind. My college savings account, meticulously built by my mother over years of extra shifts and sleepless nights, was supposed to be my lifeline, my ticket out of the small, suffocating town. Instead, it vanished. Not dwindled, not reduced by unforeseen expenses, completely gone, as if swallowed by some invisible abyss. I didn't notice immediately. My father was charming, the kind of man whose laughter could fill a room and whose promises always sounded too good to be questioned. He had a way of brushing off details with a wave of his hand, spinning stories so vivid you'd forget the cracks underneath. So, when I noticed some vague inconsistencies in my financial documents, I chalked it up to my own mismanagement, not his betrayal. But the signs grew. The envelopes from the bank that my mother always opened first began to pile up, unopened, on the kitchen counter. My father started disappearing for hours at odd times, always returning with some half-baked excuse. Then came the arguments, low, hushed whispers that escalated into shouting matches after dark. I finally decided to confront the elephant in the room when I saw the tears in my mother's eyes as she stared at yet another statement from the bank. "Where's the money, Mom?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. She hesitated, her lips trembling before she muttered something about unforeseen expenses. It wasn't until my father came home that night, smelling of stale beer and bad decisions, that I saw the truth flicker in her eyes. The $35,000 that had been my future, my hope, it was gone. My father, the man who had always told me to dream big, had gambled it away. I was just beginning to realize how deep his betrayal ran. The weight of his betrayal settled in my chest like a stone, cold and unyielding. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with questions, each one more painful than the last. How could he do this? Why didn't my mother stop him? And more than anything else, what was I going to do now? I tried confronting him the next morning, hoping there was some mistake, some logical explanation that could erase the pit forming in my stomach. "Dad," I began cautiously as he sipped his coffee, "I need to talk about the college fund." His reaction was swift and defensive, his chair scraping loudly against the tile as he stood. "It's fine. Everything's fine," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Don't worry about it." But I couldn't let it go. I pressed him, my voice trembling with anger and desperation. "Don't lie to me, Dad. It's gone, isn't it? You took it." His face darkened, the charm he so often wore like a mask slipping to reveal something uglier. "I had no choice," he snapped. "You wouldn't understand. It was complicated. Complicated." That was his excuse for stealing my future? For breaking my mother's heart? The fury bubbling inside me boiled over. "Try me," I spat. "Explain how you had no choice but to gamble away my education." But instead of an explanation, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. My mother, who had been eavesdropping from the kitchen, stepped forward, her face pale and drawn. "He didn't mean it," she said weakly, but even she didn't sound convinced. Later that day, I started digging. If he wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. I rifled through drawers, searched for hidden documents, and hacked into the old family laptop he'd stopped using months ago. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for, or rather, to stumble upon something I wasn't expecting at all. Bank records, credit card statements, and something far worse. My father had taken out loans in my name. Thousands of dollars. All without my knowledge. My hands trembled as I pieced together the evidence, each file a nail in the coffin of my dwindling trust. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was theft, fraud. My own father had stolen my identity to feed his addiction. But that wasn't the only secret I uncovered. Hidden in the depths of his emails were conversations that turned my stomach. They weren't just about money. There was someone else. A woman. A mistress. The man I thought I knew was unraveling before my eyes, and the truth was far uglier than I'd ever imagined. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, the glaring light illuminating the damning evidence. Each email was worse than the last, filled with flirtations, promises, and even plans that made my stomach churn. The woman was younger, far younger than my father, and every word they exchanged dripped with manipulation and deceit. He wasn't just gambling away money, He was gambling away our lives. The air in the house felt suffocating. I had to get out. Grabbing my jacket, I stormed down the hallway, ignoring my mother's soft, "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I couldn't even look at her. She didn't know, and the weight of deciding whether to tell her pressed on my chest like a vice. I jumped in my car and drove aimlessly, my thoughts spiraling. Rage, betrayal, confusion. They all swirled together until I couldn't see straight. I pulled into a deserted park, the kind where the swings creak in the wind, and parked under a dim streetlight. "I need to confront him," I muttered to myself, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. But how? March into the house and throw the evidence in his face? Demand he explain himself? No. That wouldn't work. My father was slippery, always ready with excuses and half-truths. Instead, I started making calls. First to the bank, to confirm what I already suspected. The loans weren't just large, they were crippling. He'd maxed out my name, and if I didn't act fast, my credit would be ruined before I even had a chance to build it. "Is this your signature?" the representative asked after a long pause. "No," I replied through gritted teeth, my voice barely a whisper. "It's not." The second call was to a friend, Alex, who'd always been good with tech. I needed someone who could help me dig deeper, uncover anything else my father was hiding. Alex agreed without hesitation, sensing the urgency in my voice. "Send me everything you've got," he said. "I'll look into it tonight." By the time I returned home, the house was dark except for the faint glow of the TV in the living room. My father was sprawled on the couch, a beer in hand, his gaze fixed on some late-night sports game. The sight of him lounging there, so carefree while I was drowning in the mess he'd created, sent a surge of anger through me. "Hey," I said, stepping into the room. He looked up, startled by my tone. "What's your problem now?" I held up my phone, the screen showing one of the incriminating emails. "This," I said, my voice like ice. "This is my problem." His face fell, but only for a moment. Then the familiar mask of denial slipped back on. "You've been snooping through my stuff," he accused, standing up and towering over me. I didn't flinch. "Don't you dare try to make me the bad guy here. You stole from me, from Mom. You're gambling, cheating, lying, and you've dragged us all into your mess." "Watch your tone," he snapped, pointing a finger at me. "Or what?" I shot back, stepping closer. "You'll forge my name again? Steal more money? What's next, Dad? Sell the house out from under us?" His eyes flickered with something. Guilt, fear, or maybe just the realization that I wasn't backing down this time. "You don't understand," he said finally, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "I had no choice." "No choice," I repeated, my voice rising. "You had a choice every single time you picked gambling over us. Every time you sent an email to that." I couldn't even finish the sentence. The disgust in my voice said it all. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. "It's complicated," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "Uncomplicated for me, then," I demanded. "Tell me why you thought it was okay to destroy our lives." Instead of answering, he grabbed his jacket and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. I sank onto the couch, my adrenaline fading, replaced by exhaustion and despair. A moment later, my mother appeared in the doorway, her face etched with worry. "What's going on?" she asked softly. I hesitated. Telling her the truth felt like tearing her heart out, but she deserved to know. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling, "we need to talk." Her eyes widened, and she sat down beside me, bracing herself for the storm. I began to explain, each word heavier than the last. The next morning, I woke up with my head pounding and the weight of the previous night's revelations pressing on my chest. My mother had stayed up late, asking question after question as I slowly unraveled the truth. Her face was a mosaic of disbelief and heartbreak as I told her about the loans, the gambling, and, when I could no longer avoid it, the mistress. Her reaction was quiet but shattering. She didn't cry, didn't yell, she just sat there, staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. "Are you sure about all of this?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wish I weren't," I replied. By the time she went to bed, she looked like a shell of herself. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would all be okay, but I didn't have the strength to lie anymore. I decided to get out of the house for a bit. Maybe a walk would help clear my head, give me time to think about what I'd do next. But as I stepped outside, the brisk morning air stung my skin, and the world felt off-kilter, like I was moving in slow motion. I wasn't paying attention, lost in thought as I followed the familiar path through the park near our house. The grass was damp with dew, and the trail was uneven in places, roots and rocks jutting out like little traps waiting to snag someone's foot. And snag me they did. I didn't even see it happen. One moment I was walking, my mind racing, and the next I was airborne, arms flailing as the ground rushed up to meet me. My right arm took the brunt of the fall, and a sickening crack echoed in my ears. Pain exploded through me, sharp and searing. I rolled onto my back, clutching my arm and groaning. A few joggers stopped to help, their concerned faces swimming in and out of focus as I tried to sit up. "Are you okay? Can you move it?" one of them asked. I shook my head, biting back a scream as I tried to flex my fingers. "I don't think so," I managed through gritted teeth. Someone called an ambulance, and within minutes, I was on my way to the hospital. The ride was a blur of throbbing pain and frustration. Of all the things to happen, I couldn't believe I'd managed to break my arm in the middle of this mess. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed what I already knew, a clean break. They set it and fitted me with a cast, the whole process leaving me more drained than I thought possible. By the time I returned home, I was exhausted, humiliated, and furious at myself. My mother rushed to the door as soon as she heard me come in. "What happened?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. "I tripped," I muttered, holding up my cast. "It's nothing. Nothing." "You're in a cast," she exclaimed, guiding me to the couch and fuss. As my mother hovered around me, fluffing pillows and offering water, I fought the urge to snap. The painkillers had dulled the ache in my arm, but my frustration burned hotter than ever. I was stuck, literally and figuratively, with no clear path forward. "Mom, stop," I finally said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I'm fine. It's just a broken arm." She froze for a moment, then nodded, retreating to the kitchen with a murmured, "Okay." I could hear her fumbling with dishes, the clinking and clattering oddly frantic. She was trying to keep busy, to distract herself from the elephant that had bulldozed into our lives. I sank into the couch, staring at the ceiling and replaying everything in my head. My father's lies. The empty college fund. The loans in my name. And now this damn arm. It was as if the universe was piling on, testing how much I could take before I snapped completely. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Alex, my tech-savvy friend. "Hey," he said when I answered. "I've got something for you." "What is it?" I asked, sitting up a little too quickly and wincing as pain shot through my arm. "I dug deeper into your dad's stuff. You're not going to believe this." "Oh, at this point, I'll believe anything," I muttered. "There's more debt," Alex said, his tone grave. "Not just the loans he took out in your name. Credit cards, payday loans, even a second mortgage on your house." My stomach dropped. "What? How is that even possible? The house is paid off." "Not anymore," Alex replied. "It looks like he refinanced it a while back. And get this, he's behind on the payments. Way behind. If something doesn't happen soon, the bank's going to foreclose." I felt like the ground had been yanked out from under me again. "He never said anything about that," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Of course he didn't," Alex said. "And there's more. I found some emails between him and, let's just say, not the nicest people. Loan sharks. He owes them a lot of money. Loan sharks." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about gambling or poor financial decisions anymore. This was dangerous. "Thanks, Alex," I said, my voice hollow. I'll figure something out." "Be careful," he warned. "Seriously. This kind of thing can get ugly fast." As I hung up, my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if these people came after us? What if they hurt my mother? Or me? I couldn't sit still anymore. I needed answers. My father had to explain himself. Forcing myself off the couch, I grabbed my jacket, ignoring the twinge in my arm as I struggled to get it on. "Where are you going?" my mother asked as I headed for the door. "To find him," I said, my voice tight. She didn't try to stop me, just watched with a mix of worry and sadness as I left. I didn't have to go far. My father was at the local dive bar, the one he always claimed was just a place to unwind. I spotted him through the grimy window, hunched over a drink, looking every bit the broken man he'd become. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside, the smell of stale beer and cheap cologne assaulting my senses. He glanced up as I approached, his eyes narrowing when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone defensive. "We need to talk," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "And this time, you're not walking away." He leaned back, his expression a mix of irritation and weariness. "Fine. Talk." But as I opened my mouth to start, I realized I didn't even know where to begin. How do you confront the man who's supposed to protect you when he's the one tearing your world apart? The bar was dimly lit, with the kind of sticky floors and chipped tables that told you it had been the setting for 1,000 bad decisions. My father looked like he belonged there, slouched over his drink, the lines on his face deepened by guilt, or maybe just exhaustion. I sat there for a moment, studying him. The man who had once seemed larger than life to me now looked small, pathetic. But the anger burning in my chest refused to let me pity him. "You gambled away my college fund," I said, my voice low but steady. "You forged my name on loans. And now I find out you've mortgaged the house and owe money to loan sharks? What the hell is wrong with you?" He winced, his fingers tightening around his glass. "Keep your voice down," he hissed, glancing around the bar. "Why?" "Embarrassed." I shot back. "Because you damn well should be." His jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he might lash out. But instead, he sighed and rubbed his temples. "You don't understand, okay? I didn't mean for it to get this bad. It got out of control." "Out of control," I repeated, my voice rising despite his warning. "This isn't some mistake, Dad. You didn't trip and fall into tens of thousands of dollars of debt. You made choices. Bad ones. Over and over again. And now, we're all paying for them." He looked down at the table, avoiding my gaze. "I thought I could fix it," he muttered. I laughed bitterly. "Fix it? You've been digging a deeper hole this whole time. Do you even care what this has done to Mom? To me?" At the mention of my mother, his expression hardened. "Don't bring her into this," he snapped. "Oh, she's already in it," I retorted. "She's the one who's been holding everything together while you tear it all apart. And for what? A couple of drinks? A few nights at the casino? Or is this about her?" I slammed my phone down on the table, the screen still showing one of his emails to the mistress. His face paled, and for a moment I thought he might try to deny it. But instead, he swore under his breath and pushed his glass away. "I never wanted you to find out about that," he said quietly. "Well, I did," I said. "And now I know just how little we mean to you." "That's not true," he barked, his voice louder than I'd ever heard it. Heads turned, but I didn't care. Let them stare. "I love you and your mother more than anything. I made mistakes." "Mistakes," I repeated, shaking my head. "This isn't love, Dad. Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't steal, lie, or destroy everything in its path." He buried his face in his hands, and for a moment I thought I saw his shoulders shake. Was he crying? No. That couldn't be right. My father didn't cry. "I didn't know how to stop," he admitted, his voice muffled. "Every time I tried to pull back, it was like the debt just kept growing. And then the loan sharks got involved, and I didn't want them to come after you or your mother." I leaned forward, my anger momentarily tempered by confusion. "So, what's your plan now? Because it sure as hell looks like you're just sitting here, drinking and waiting for it all to fall apart." He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and tired. "I don't know," he said honestly. I stared at him, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to demand answers or solutions. But another part, a darker, more pragmatic part, knew the truth. He didn't have a plan. He never had. And if I didn't step up, everything we had left would crumble. I stood abruptly, pushing my chair back with a scrape. "Enjoy your drink, Dad," I said coldly. "Because when I'm done cleaning up your mess, you won't have a home to come back to." He opened his mouth to say something, but I was already walking away. The night air hit me like a slap, sharp and bracing. I clenched my fists, my broken arm aching in its cast as I vowed to take control of the situation. I couldn't save him, but maybe, just maybe, I could save the rest of us. The morning after my confrontation with my father, I felt more determined than ever to salvage what was left of our lives. I spent hours compiling everything Alex had uncovered, the loans, the emails, the foreclosure notices. I planned to bring it to the bank and see if there was any way to untangle myself from the financial chaos my father had dragged me into. But as I was preparing to leave, my phone buzzed with a notification. At first, I ignored it, too focused on my plans. But then it buzzed again. And again. Finally, I glanced at the screen and froze. It was a news alert. My name was in the headline. Local man suspected of fraudulent loan scheme, it read, followed by a short blurb about how I was being investigated for identity theft and credit fraud. My heart stopped. What? How could this even be possible? I reread the headline, convinced there had to be some mistake. But there it was, clear as day. My name, my supposed crimes, all laid out for the world to see. I felt the blood drain from my face as I skimmed the article. It was vague, but the accusations were damning. Someone had reported me to the authorities, claiming I'd taken out multiple loans under false pretenses. My stomach churned as I realized what must have happened. My father. I stormed out of the house and called him, my fingers trembling as I dialed. He picked up on the third ring, sounding groggy. "Hey, what's up?" he mumbled. "What's up?" I spat. "Are you kidding me? Did you seriously try to pin your crimes on me?" There was a pause, and then he sighed. "Look, it's not what you think. Not what I think." I interrupted, my voice rising. "My name is all over the news. They think I'm the one who committed fraud. How could you do this to me?" "I didn't have a choice," he said weakly. "They were threatening me. I had to give them a name, and, well, yours was already on the loans." It made sense. Made sense. I yelled. "You've ruined my life, Dad. Do you even realize what you've done?" Before he could respond, I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I needed to think, to figure out what to do. But before I could make a plan, the sound of tires crunching on gravel caught my attention. A police car pulled into the driveway, its lights flashing. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions grim. "Are you name?" one of them asked. "Yes," I said hesitantly. "We need to ask you a few questions," he continued, pulling out a notepad. "It's about the loans." I wanted to explain, to tell them everything about my father and his schemes, but the words caught in my throat. They weren't here to listen. They were here to accuse. The next hour passed in a blur. I was taken to the station, my broken arm throbbing as they cuffed me, too tightly, around my wrists. They asked question after question, each one more pointed than the last. I tried to tell them the truth, but without hard evidence, my words felt hollow. By the time they released me, I felt like a shadow of myself. The officers warned me not to leave town and said they'd be in touch. I stumbled out of the station, my mind racing. This wasn't just a financial problem anymore. It was criminal. And if I didn't act fast, I was going to pay for my father's sins in ways I couldn't even fathom. When I got home, my mother was waiting for me, her face pale with worry. "What happened?" she asked, rushing to my side. "They think I did it," I said hollowly. "They think I'm the one who committed fraud." Her eyes widened, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "No," she whispered. "This can't be happening." "It is," I said, sinking onto the couch. "And if we don't figure something out, I'm going to take the fall for all of it." The realization hit me like a freight train. My father had gone too far this time. He wasn't just destroying my future, he was threatening to take away my freedom. I clenched my fists, the pain in my arm a dull reminder of everything I had already endured. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If my father thought he could throw me under the bus and walk away unscathed, he was in for a rude awakening. He'd started this mess, but I was going to finish it. One way or another. The day after my release, the storm brewing around me only worsened. The whispers, the pointed stares, I could feel my life unraveling. Every phone call felt like bad news waiting to strike. And then, the worst of it came in the form of a knock at the door. It was him. My father. I opened the door, and there he stood, wearing a smug expression that made my blood boil. He didn't even bother with pleasantries, stepping inside uninvited. "We need to talk," he said, his tone dripping with false authority. "Talk?" I hissed. "You mean lie? Manipulate? What is it this time, Dad? Or should I call you a fraud like the rest of the world knows you to be?" His face hardened, his eyes narrowing. "Watch your mouth, boy," he growled. "Or what?" I shot back, stepping closer despite the sharp pain in my broken arm. "You'll steal from me again? Or maybe pin more crimes on me? Why stop now?" His nostrils flared as his temper flared. "You don't know when to quit, do you? After everything I've done for this family, you have the audacity to betray me." "Betray you?" I said, incredulous. "You're the one who destroyed everything. And now you're trying to ruin me to save your own skin." Before I could react, his hand shot out, grabbing the front of my shirt and yanking me forward. "You think you can talk to me like that?" he spat. I shoved him back, but my broken arm screamed in protest. He saw the wince, the weakness, and he exploited it. His next move was a blur of violence, a shove that sent me sprawling backward, my injured arm slamming into the edge of the kitchen counter with a sickening crunch. The pain was immediate and blinding. I screamed, clutching my arm as I crumpled to the floor. "You son of a—" I started, but his voice cut through my agony. "Shut up," he barked, towering over me. "You don't know what you're talking about. And you'll keep your mouth shut, or I'll make sure you regret it." Through the haze of pain, his words didn't make sense. I stared at him, my vision blurring, and for the first time, I felt real fear. He knelt down, grabbing my face with a force that made me flinch. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he sneered. "Digging into things that don't concern you. Well, let me clue you in on something, kid. You're not even my son." The words hit harder than the counter had. I froze, staring at him as my mind reeled. What are you talking about?" I stammered. He smirked, the satisfaction of my shock evident. "Your mom had her secrets too, boy. You're not mine. Never were. She begged me to raise you, to pretend, and I did. But I owe you nothing. You're just some charity case that's overstayed your welcome." The room spun. His words gutted me, each one slicing through the fragile understanding I thought I had of my life. He stood and grabbed his phone, dialing with deliberate calmness. "Yeah," he said into the receiver. "He's out of control. Come handle it." I didn't understand until I heard the sirens approaching. I tried to get up, to defend myself, but the pain in my arm made me collapse again. The same officers from before stormed in, their expressions unreadable. "He's attacking me," my father lied, his voice trembling with faux fear. "I think he's lost it. Look at him." I opened my mouth to protest, but one of the officers grabbed my good arm and yanked me to my feet. "You're coming with us," he said coldly. "What?" I yelled, struggling against the grip. "He attacked me. He broke my arm." But the officers weren't listening. One of them exchanged a look with my father, a silent understanding passing between them. My father stepped closer, his voice low so only I could hear. "I took care of everything," he whispered. "You'll be out of the picture soon enough. Consider this my thanks for your betrayal." As they dragged me toward the door, I realized the truth. He'd paid them off, turned the system against me to protect himself. My life wasn't just unraveling. It was being torn apart by the man who had claimed to be my father, a man I now knew had never truly been one at all. I sat in the holding cell, the cold seeping into my bones, but my mind burned with determination. My father had played his hand, but he underestimated me. I wasn't going to let him win, not after everything he'd done. The officers didn't know I still had my phone on me. It had fallen from my pocket during the scuffle, unnoticed, and slid into the cuff of my jacket. The screen was cracked, but it worked. Quietly, I pulled it out and sent a message to Alex. "I'm in jail. My dad set me up. Use everything we found." The next few hours were agonizing. I didn't sleep, my arm throbbing in its cast, but I could feel the gears turning in Alex's head as I imagined him working furiously. Sure enough, by morning, things started to shift. A lawyer showed up, a good one. Not someone I could afford, but a family friend Alex had reached out to on my behalf. "You've got friends in high places," the lawyer said with a smile as she sat across from me. "Let's get you out of here." She was brilliant, methodical, and ruthless. Within hours, she had proof that the accusations against me were baseless, thanks to the documents Alex provided. But she didn't stop there. The moment I walked out of the station, I called Alex. "Tell me you've got more," I said. "Oh, I've got plenty," he replied, his voice full of satisfaction. "Not just the fraud and gambling. Your dad's loan shark buddies? Turns out they don't like it when their dirty laundry gets aired. And your mother? She's ready to back you all the way." It was time to strike. The next week was a whirlwind of preparation. I filed an official complaint against the officers who had taken bribes, presenting irrefutable evidence of their corruption. Internal affairs was swift and merciless. By the end of the week, both were suspended pending investigation. But the real reckoning came when I confronted my father for the last time. This time, it wasn't in some seedy bar or a cramped living room. It was in court. He sat there, smug and confident, until the evidence started rolling out. The loans in my name. The emails with the mistress. The payments to the loan sharks. And then, the piece de resistance, a recording Alex had found buried deep in an old hard drive. It was my father's voice, slurred with alcohol, bragging about how he'd forged my signature and got away with it. His face turned ghostly pale as the recording played, the courtroom silent except for his damning words. By the end of the trial, the judge had heard enough. My father was convicted of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The loan sharks, caught in their own web of crime, had no choice but to back off, their focus diverted to keeping themselves out of prison. As for my mother, she finally found her strength. She filed for divorce, cutting ties with the man who had destroyed our family. With the house legally in her name, she chose to sell it and split the proceeds with me, ensuring we both had a chance to start fresh. And me? I walked out of that courtroom free and clear, my head held high. The community that had once whispered about my supposed crimes now rallied behind me, offering support and apologies. It wasn't easy to rebuild, but I wasn't alone. Alex and my mother stood by me every step of the way. I used the money from the house sale to enroll in school, reclaiming the future that had been stolen from me. As for my father, he faced his punishment behind bars, abandoned by the mistress he'd sacrificed everything for. The man who had built his life on lies was left with nothing but the weight of his own failures. In the end, justice was served, and I found something I thought I'd lost forever: hope.